Welcome to Diversity Conversations, where we engage in thought-provoking dialogue to identify leadership solutions to today's most challenging conflicts. Stream live each week, Saturday 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. Hosted by Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategist and CEOs Eric Ellis and Tommy Lewis. Join us and add your voice to this engaging diversity conversation.
Good morning, Greater Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, the United States, and the world. My name is Eric Ellis, and I'm the President and CEO of Integrity Development Corporation. And I'm joined this morning by my good friend and brother,
Tommy Lewis, President and CEO of Make It Plain Consulting. Good morning, Eric.
Good morning, Tommy Lewis. How are you, my friend?
Once again, another beautiful Saturday morning.
Yes, sir.
Excited to be up, Adam, and very, very blessed and honored to be with you again, my brother, my friend.
Tommy, I always look forward to it, man. It's never a boring conversation. We're having a lot of fun together. We're learning things from each other, and we're grateful to have a community of followers that hang in there with us and add wisdom to every conversation that we have as well. Talk to me about your week. Tommy, how was your week?
Another great week, Eric, bringing value, add to our organizations, our partners. Most particularly, we have been working this past week in the secondary school systems, from Colorado to middle part of the country here, the tri-state of Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, Virginia. We've been working with a number of school districts around inclusive excellence, and helping their administrators and teaching staff really do two things, Eric. Develop some awareness and skills to better prepare our next generations of leaders. And then secondly, to be adaptive, more or less adaptive leadership. When our students are coming to the adults with experiences, with views, perspectives, with events that our adults are less familiar with. And so to prevent a maladaptive response, a unproductive response, we were working on helping our adults really develop this leadership and being able to increase their empathy, increase their cultural competence, as well as their cultural humility, to see not only the situation through their own eyes, but the eyes of those who the situation is directly impacting. That's what we've been doing all week. It's been some heavy lifting, Eric. It's been heavy. I'll tell you that right now. It's, although I'm giving it a good speech right now, it is hard work. But we're up for the task.
I can see the fine print underneath the work that you did this week that says, "Don't try this at home."
Yeah,
got to bring something to the party, man.
Yeah,
this work sometimes you make it look easier than it is. We've had a great week working with some of our clients like Public Citizen, and they are interested in moving to the next level. What does it look like to achieve sustainable inclusion? That's one of the themes that we talk about, is helping organizations achieve sustainable inclusion. So we're not constantly on the roller coaster of this month we value it, the next 2 months we don't. And so I'm grateful for the opportunities to partner with them in an ongoing way. We did some work with the American Society for Microbiology, and I spoke with their leadership team that's really responsible for people and culture. And there's a leader that's going to be retiring in the next few years and is really looking at their legacy and really believes that has to be around leadership and inclusion. And so I'm excited to work with them, Tommy, because of the work that they do around microbiology and understanding the organisms that we can't see with the naked eye, and how important they are to our survival and our health. And then looking beneath the surface of human beings and the unconscious biases and how sometimes they play themselves out. So I see this as a wonderful partnership where I can both share some things and learn some things, and maybe we can collaborate to create something that might make a difference in the world around us. Also, we've been conducting an executive search with one of our clients, Americans for the Arts, looking for a vice president of communication. And so we're going to be concluding sort of the open resume part of that, where we received over 300 resumes. And so we're excited about doing that work. So Tommy, just having fun, man, doing the things that we're doing, trying to make organizations better, trying to learn all the time. You and I are continuous lifelong learners. And that's part of what excites me about the guests that we have today joining us. And so we have Dr. Dana Bourne, and she's a retired Brigadier General from the Air Force, the United States Air Force, and also serves at Harvard University as the faculty chair for Senior Executive Fellows Program. She's a faculty advisor for the Black Family Graduate Fellowship and National Security Fellows, and lecturer in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. Welcome this morning, Dr. Dana Bourne. How are you?
I'm doing great, and it's so energetic. You all just kick us right off on a Saturday morning, and acknowledging that things that are tough are usually worthwhile. And I like to use the term fruitful fun. So I appreciate, making this fruitful fun, but it is tough work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I am so grateful to have you as a part of the show. We met each other a few months ago and have really built a friendship in a short amount of time. And I'd like you to sort of just start by introducing yourself to our audience. Maybe tell them a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and maybe even some of your growing up life and how you established the values that you have.
Wow, what a great question to kick us off. You already gave a little bit of the where I am now, but how did I get here, and why am I doing what I'm doing now? I think that's a question we all ask ourselves. And just to start, my humble beginnings began in a small town in upstate New York. Most people, when I travel abroad and say I'm from New York, clearly think of the Big Apple.
Right.
Where I came from, we had more horse and buggies than we had cars. So it's not really the Big Apple or New York City. So the Finger Lakes in upstate New York, I went through all of my schooling there. And then the day I graduated from high school, flew on a commercial airplane for the first time from the East Coast to Colorado, and began the United States Air Force Academy. That was in 1979. So it was the first time that they had women in each class.
Wow.
So I think we started with about 9, maybe 10% rounded up of women in the class of a little over 1,000. So that was the beginning of my Air Force career. I retired after 30 plus years in 2013, took a week off, and began here at the Harvard Kennedy School, primarily teaching leadership. So staying in the same business of advancing people in their own journey. And I'm just still enjoying the work of developing effective, principled public leaders. So it's a journey I care deeply, I think, as you all do, of helping raise people's game. And that raises basically our ability to do the hard work, which is so important around the globe.
And Dr. Bourne, you just mentioned something that I don't want our community to miss. 34 years in military, and then took 1 week off and then back at it.
Right.
I would say, Tommy, that's ill-advised.
Okay.
Right. Did you have family that was involved in the Air Force? What started your interest in thinking about the United States Air Force?
So my father served in the Coast Guard just after World War II, and he is probably the one that got me a little bit interested in maybe pursuing a service academy when I was in high school. I was initially interested in the Coast Guard Academy because my dad had served in the Coast Guard, and it turned out that I was too late at that point to apply. And so I started to look around at other opportunities, and I was fortunate to be able to go to the Air Force Academy at a time when they were trying to build up women's athletic teams. And I was a cross country and a distance runner. And so I think that gave me a little bit of a foot in the door. as a student athlete to be able to have that opportunity. And so that's really what began the journey. To pay it forward, I'm happy to say that both of my daughters actually also chose a service academy. Our oldest graduated from the Air Force Academy, and after grad school, she's now down at pilot training at Fort Rucker in Alabama. And our youngest daughter is at the Naval Academy. And so
Okay.
my husband's a Naval Academy graduate. So our family is divided or united, depending on how you look at it.
Right, right. Well, I'd like to slow things down. Typically, we'd like to slow things down because we sort of just blew through, I made the choice and retired Brigadier General. Talk to us. The topic that we wanted to look at today was successful women in male-dominated environments. And so I don't know how much thought you gave to that or if that was an everyday thought, but talk to us about what does it look like? What does it feel like? What are some of the things that you experience as a woman in male-dominated environments in a military Air Force kind of environment?
That's a very deep and broad question. And I will share that I have changed in my perspective over time. When I consider, first of all, my beginning at the Air Force Academy, I don't think I really appreciated or recognized that we were such a minority. And in some cases, I think it was my own mindset because I just so deeply wanted to fit in and succeed that I felt as though I had a literal band of brothers, and it was almost a token time period. So there were only maybe one or two women, in each of the squadrons in our class. So we were roommates, we were supporting each other, but ultimately we wanted to fit in. And I later went back as a captain and was teaching, and I was really fascinated. By that point, we had grown to maybe 20% women. And I saw the difference where there was more of an appreciation of, yes, we want to fit in, but we also are distinctive in recognizing that we are, women cadets. And then later, as the dean, which was, decade later, I recognized that there really was a more of a, when you reach 25, 30%, there's something significantly different. And it's, I think in research shows that as well. There's a tipping point where the culture becomes much more inclusive. And so I actually saw that over the period of my 30-year career. And some of that I think was some of it was the proportion of the growth, which is happening in our nation right now. I mean, it's not long, another decade, we're going to be, what used to be the minority will be majority, and what was the majority will be minority. So it's a fascinating way to think about the experience. I also have grown to value the fact that I'm a woman and a woman that was and is in uniform. And I think I didn't initially appreciate the value of embracing that. When I went off, the Air Force sent me for my doctorate in industrial organizational psychology. And before I left, some mentors said you should study women's issues. And my response was, well, that's not me. Other people may be interested in studying that. And I think that's like the best advice I did not ignore because they knew that I was going to be potentially rising to the senior ranks and that I needed to be aware of women's issues as a woman in uniform.
It sounds like from your military experiences, there was some intention from the Air Force to diversify from a gender perspective. It also sounds like there was some intention with the advice for mentors given to you. Can you talk about very briefly your trajectory into leadership and either its intention, your intention to be a leader, or just circumstances were provided to you to really articulate your internal leadership abilities and skills?
Tommy, I love that question because it gives me a way to express gratitude to people who had me believe in myself beyond what I believed in myself. And I think if there's any rise into leadership opportunities, it was by others that saw something in me I didn't maybe embrace or see in myself. And maybe that resonates with you. Just to make the first female general officer out of the service academies, which is a pretty big deal as I look back on that now, I actually didn't apply for the position initially. And it was a mentor by the name of Brigadier General Doug Murray, who was a much more senior faculty. He was the permanent professor of another department, but he was much more senior. And he came to me and said, "Hey, I noted that you didn't apply to be the dean. I'd just like to explore that with you. Is there something going on in your life that you didn't, apply?" And I said, "No, it's just I'm a woman. They've never had a woman. I'm much more junior. I just got here. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a pilot for the Air Force." And so I took myself out of the running. And he expressed it to me in a way that said, "Well, don't you think that's for the Air Force to decide?" And then he used the word duty. And he said, "Don't you think it's your duty to apply?" And of course, that duty concept he knew got me. And so he was a good negotiator. But what's fascinating is he also was a candidate for the position. And it's mind-boggling to me to say that he would be willing to, in a sense, maybe bring another person into the competition, so to speak, because his mentorship meant more to him and having the right person than it did making sure that he was the one that would be the one considered. It was fascinating. So I salute Brigadier General Doug Murray as amazing. He opened the door, and then there's many others to follow. And I just kind of say I'm so grateful for people who are always looking out to raise people up and to push people into levels where they might not believe that they have it, but they could with the help of a good surrounding mentorship.
That's excellent.
As you think about the Air Force, what would you describe as the good, the bad, the ugly? I was just thinking about the movie. As you think about your experiences, that's an example of bright spot, someone who saw you and saw something in you that they were willing to say that our institution needs that more than holding people out of opportunities. What did you run into or see in terms of people that weren't real fans of women in United States Air Force?
Yeah, I think that there were a lot of times within the military that I kind of had to shake my head to like, and I have to admit I was probably more judgmental in like, how can you see it that way, as opposed to being more curious, which I've grown, I think, to realize that leaning into more curiosity and leaning into wonderment is much more fruitful than trying to judge whether somebody's right or wrong. And, I think that there were times, even just in terms of when I was a commander at Bowling Air Force Base and had just gotten my PhD, was commanding during 9/11. And I was trying to do both, right? I was president for the American Psychological Association, division for military psychology. I was also a commander. And I remember a senior mentor saying, "Dana, you have to choose. Are you going to be a commander or an academic?" And whenever I hear "or," I always want to straddle the "and."
Right.
And so I tried to do both. And I think that expresses how I respond now to a comment where somebody will say something and say, "Yeah, but it doesn't, military people are this." And I kind of look at myself and say, "Well, yes, and," as opposed to instead of defending the "or." So I don't know if that's helpful, but there were times, and I'll just say, here's a funny one. When I first got to the Air Force Academy, so brand new, far from home, don't know really what I've gotten myself into. And somebody asked me, a male cadet at the end of the table said, "Miss Lindsley," and that was my maiden name, said, "Yes, sir," because you only have 5 responses as a brand new, right? "Yes, sir," "No, sir," "Sir may make a statement," "Sir may ask a question," or "No excuse, sir." Those are the only responses. Or you can put "ma'am" in there as well, but those are your only responses. So I said, "Sir, may I ask a question?" He said, "I'm asking you a question." And he said, "Did you come here for your MRS?" I'm, my dad was an academic leader and everything. I'm thinking, okay, I know what I know what a master's MS is. That's a master's of science. Okay, I know an MA, and I'm sitting there. I'm not getting it because I'm probably nervous. And he said, "Did you come here for your MRS?" And I said, "Sir, I do not understand." And he said, "No, say yes or no." And I said, "Let me ask a question, sir. What do you mean?" And he said, "Just answer my question." I said, "No, sir," because I realized he was asking me, did I come here to meet a husband? Right? Did you come here for your Mrs. MRS?
Oh my goodness.
We didn't get it either. Exactly. I sat there and I just thought, where am I? If that is the perspective, but then as I thought about it, I thought, well, the ratio was pretty good.
Yeah, right. To
Wow.
play the odds, right?
But
One of the things that I wanted you to share is because I think so much of success is about perspective. And I think that as we want to change institutions, we have to also look at what do we bring in terms of our perspective to inequities that we may face. But when I heard you speak, I was really just blown away by how charismatic you were and how transparent you were and vulnerable. And you talked about some experiences of growing up in school and at a time when you didn't feel as confident and somebody took you under your wings. I wonder if you wouldn't mind just sharing a story about how you started off as a kid in your schooling experience.
Yes, and we talked about this a little bit, Tommy, when you were sharing about the emblem for Make It Plain and where that came from. And really, I think there's a Winston Churchill quote that says, "The further back we look, maybe the further ahead we can see." And I think that's true about our life stories as well, that oftentimes our life stories, as we think back, it's a backpack that we carry of a lot of heavy rocks, sometimes therapy we go through to deal with them. And I've kind of grown to learn that that backpack actually is a jetpack, that what's in our life story can be reframed to be what really fuels us to be effective in our lives, in our love, and in our leadership. And I think it's probably evident that 30 years of service in the military and actually even my continuing service in my failing of retirement is still about developing leaders. So where does that come from? My first test in life, I think I failed, which is the infant reaction test. And my mother noticed over a period of time growing up, just as I was getting ready to start school, that I was not developing in the same way that I should for someone my age. And it was tied back to not having enough oxygen early on and some parts of my brain not working, in the left brain, right brain communication as they should. So for 2 months, she invested in having me with 2 tutors, helping me to basically train the sides of my brain. And it was like drawing circles with both hands on a board, patting my head and rubbing my tummy. I mean, for 2 months. But what happened was it transformed my ability to learn and to do things that took me from going into a class for severely, at the time, mentally retarded and severely learning disabled to mainstreaming. And I think there were 2 things that came out of that time period for me, which was incredibly painful. A time where I said I can't, as opposed to I can't yet. A time where I said, I have to say I'll try or I'll try again. And one was that work effort and recognizing that through effort, the growth mindset that Carol Dweck at Stanford talks about, as opposed to a fixed mindset, is incredibly important. And I can't help but want to develop that in myself and others. The other is feeling left out. I couldn't do what most people, my brothers and sisters could do somersaults or cartwheels and read, and I couldn't. And I felt left out oftentimes just because I was the one that, couldn't. And so I found that I actually wanted to include others in a very serious way. I would find the homesick kid at summer camp and become their best friend, or I would find the person in a wheelchair at the beach in New Jersey and play beach ball with them. And I think that that was just a part of my own, you do unto others as you would want others to do, unto you. And so I think that that's part of my jetpack. And maybe that's what brought us together here, Tommy and Eric. It's that same common cause, but maybe from different stories of our lives. I do think about George Jetson when I think about the jetpack.
Okay.
You do, but that's what really lifts us off into really bringing our best selves to create a better world.
I so much enjoy that background, the background you just shared, your energy, your thought process. I thoroughly enjoy it as you were talking about kind of reframing those messages. In my business, and as well as Eric, we do executive coaching, and maybe the executive C-suite, it may be the individual contributor. But I have been working with some individuals around reframing some of those negative messages, some of those boulders and rocks in their backpack. And now I have another solution for them from you, right? And how to reframe it to turn it into that jetpack. So thank you. I just wanted to pause and say thank you for that nugget of wisdom.
Thank you. And I'd like to add, if I can, some research that just came out from a colleague here at the Kennedy School on something. It's kind of a reappraisal for this pandemic period we're in. It's a study done by Professor Jen Lerner, who's more of a cognitive psychologist, and she does a lot of research on decision making. She's actually been the chief decision making assistant to the Navy, and her work is with, I think, 500 other researchers and 28,000 people, I think, in several different countries. But she talks about something of reappraisal, and it's reconstruing and repurposing. And they've done some very brief training that has moved the needle for people on how to deal with the pandemic. Reconstruing is like when you're overwhelmed with fear of the virus, and now we're having an uptick, right, of another phase of this period. Reconstruing is like, well, if I socially distance, if I wash my hands, if I wear a mask, in other words, it's reconstruing that I have some agency to protect myself and others in this, then that actually helps in our overall well-being and our ability to then perform effectively or to be there for people that we love and that love us. And then the other is repurposing. And repurposing is kind of like, this pandemic is awful. It's changed the world. It's disrupted normality, however you want to, fill in the blank of the negativity. Repurposing is saying, this time has helped me prioritize who's most important to me. It's helped me prioritize how I spend my time. It's helped me rethink, what is a good work-life integration for me at this time in my life. And so that repurposing is actually also a way that you can train people to kind of repurpose how they think about the pandemic. So I just share that because, reframing, reappraisal, that rethinking, reflecting, is a very important part of this.
Right. I love that. As I think about the organizations that we work with, oftentimes, one of the things that I'm seeing is that people aren't spending a lot of time talking about COVID-19 and its impact on their lives and their psychology and their energy and their emotions. What I have found is that when they do have intentional conversations around how they're navigating this, greater courage comes out of it, and a greater inspiration as we hear people talk about the ways that they've navigated through this. What are you all doing to try to facilitate people being able to embrace the reality of this and use that as a jetpack, as what you were saying, to bring us together, give us greater empathy for one another, and maybe greater collective courage that we can sustain this?
Eric, it's your answers, I think, in your question from my perspective, and it's that word courage. And the root word of courage is heart. cur is heart. And so I think that, having our heart in it is so critically important. So many times we approach things, like Aristotle talks about the logos, from the head, the logic, as strategy. Or where's the heart, where's the courage in that, and then the action is a part of that too, and trust. And so I think that the way I would respond to your question is really about having that courage, which means your heart rate tends to go up. Anything that requires courage speaks to our amygdala, our reptilian brain that says danger, danger, danger.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
and yet when we can think about our role of why that's important to work through that elevated heart rate, to do the hard stuff, to face, the challenges with the ample support to know that we can do that. I think that's a critical piece of this time, to not want to lean back into what's comfortable and what maybe is easy, but to lean into what is a little harder. And that can be physical courage, it can be moral courage, or it can be psychological courage. But to lean into a bit of discomfort to get to where we go, oh, if I can do that, I wonder what else I can do. That's growth.
I agree. I think that is growth. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about your work at Harvard, but just to dovetail off of this comment here, any suggestions, thoughts, recommendations around where people may be overwhelmed with fear, uncertainty, ambiguity, and it's firing their amygdala, and they're in the flee or the freeze moment, right? They become immobilized and static, and really cannot often see the opportunities for that growth. Can you talk about how can we overcome that paralyzing emotion of fear to move forward into courage?
Oh, thank you for that great question. I have to share, Eleanor Roosevelt had some wonderful quotes, and one of her quotes that I like a lot is, she says, you gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You must do the thing you think you cannot do. And Professor Jen Lerner, once again, she leads our decision making here at the Kennedy School, and she does research on how you can get from that amygdala and that natural reaction that is survival of the fittest for us as humans, to get to the frontal lobe where we can, really propel ourselves to actually think and act and do. And she said, Charles Darwin tried to override that amygdala. Remember Darwin, he's got a snake in a plexiglass and tried to show that he would not jump back when the snake lunged, knowing that the plexiglass would, protect him.
Yeah.
And he couldn't, no matter how, he could not get the frontal lobe to override the reptilian brain of our natural reaction to respond by jumping back. And so Jen Lerner's research has shown that there are some things that we find that do help us make that transition quicker. And that's important because first responders, right, need to be able to get to where they're thinking about triage and all kinds of things that take the frontal lobe. And she said one of them is sort of a timeout or a pause, a deep breath, a moment to kind of center, to be present. And then another is actually to be clear about our role. So it might be a role of, I faint at the sight of blood, but, I'm the mom, I'm the parent, I'm the adult that has to respond in this situation. Or I'm the first on the scene alongside of the road and I need to act because otherwise these people, so it's on me. Something about a role. And for me, she shares a story that I've shared, that after 9/11 in Washington, D.C., I was a commander, and we had an accountability that we do as soon as something like what happened on 9/11 at the Pentagon in particular, but I mean, obviously in New York City as well, we had, and in Pennsylvania, we had to go to an area to account for all of our people and then to do our mission. And when we got to the accountability area, one of my very important members of my unit that had a very important responsibility fainted, and I just fell down to her side and rallied her, saying, we really need you right now. You've got certain information that is critical to us succeeding. And she rallied, I think, given that, but she was overwhelmed with grief because her spouse and her child were in the Pentagon daycare, and my kids were in the Pentagon daycare as well. And so I think what overrode for me was I was the commander, and she was an employee and an airman that we really needed to step up to. And so we sort of partnered in our roles of needing to act at the time when we were really worried about our loved ones, as everyone was.
Yes.
Let me ask you this. Now, for us as people of color, when we see something like that happen with another person of color, we feel it almost feels personal for us. As a woman, did that enter your brain at all, or did you just really move to leadership and recognize that that could have happened to anybody?
Gender in my mind was not even a part of it. It's fascinating because this is the mindset I was thinking about earlier, and I don't know why. Having said that, when I repeat the story, and when I say they fainted and then I use she, there are some gender kind of attributes that maybe it's the same thing with regard to crying and showing emotion.
Absolutely.
And I did feel that also, in that whenever I cry at grocery store ribbon cuttings, right?
I do too. Right. I love crying sometimes.
Yeah, but as a woman in uniform, I had to self-monitor that and to regulate that because of what I knew others felt. It's kind of like the book Whistling Vivaldi. I think that it's a classic, right? Of here's this PhD sociologist from Stanford, and he used to whistle Vivaldi at night going up to an ATM because he thought then people wouldn't think he was going to harm them, because what man of color whistles Vivaldi? It was just to disrupt. So I don't know. I think we do a lot of regulating based on, but at that time I don't think I was thinking about gender at all. It was really about, we got a mission to do here, and everybody's relying on us to rally.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't be thinking about gender as her gender, but it's just the pressure that sometimes we feel. I know Tommy and I feel that when a Will Smith goes up and slaps, it's like, oh my goodness, somebody black did something crazy again. So sometimes that adds pressure. As you look at your own life and the spaces that you're in, what are the top 3 things that pull upon your need to demonstrate courage? What are the things that give you fear or pause, and then how do you turn toward courage to hang in there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we all have natural fears, and I think we all have natural goals, which are important, as humans. For me, it ties to my life story, and maybe it does for many people, tied to their life stories. But my fear is always failure, and I find that that's not just me, because I do an exercise with executives and young global leaders, ministers of education, finance, and I just do what's your greatest fear in the next 2 to 5 years, even with first responders, and you would think that most people would answer it by, global terror or, climate change, or, all the things that we are causes that we are devoting our life to. But it's not. It's every group. It's fear of failure. It's fear of, a loss of a connection with a loved one. It's fear of, it could be fear of loss of that person, death and dying, and or fear of, getting to the end of our life and feeling as though it was not significant. Those are like the natural fears of, my last breath, and going like Mr. Rogers did I do enough?
Right.
Yeah, this is such a rich conversation. In the Kennedy School, which has a very, very strong reputation academically, not only domestically in the U.S., but globally. Harvard University in and of itself has its reputation. Could you talk just for a moment about how sometimes the assumption of the reputation of Harvard or of the Kennedy School, how the reputation sometimes creates fear in people. It may intimidate folks, and once they get into it, then they may have a different experience. But could you talk about that potential intimidation based on reputation?
Yes, Thomas. And every time I do, I work with the degree students who, are here for a year or 2 years. I also work with our national security fellows who are here for a year, and they're senior military folks. And I work with executives that come in and are here for maybe a month and then go back into their senior executive roles around the world. And everybody who sits in a seat or a classroom here, or even in front of the classroom, I would say, thinks that they're an admissions error. I know faculty who have been here for decades who say, I never purchased a piece of Harvard because I'm one day away from being, fired. And so there is that sense of fear because it is Harvard. And one of the things that I think people start to recognize, including former Secretary of Defense Ash Carter, who was here speaking when he was the Secretary of Defense, and one of our students said, "Hey, to what do you attribute your time at Harvard to?" And he said two things. He said, one, that it helped me realize, it gave me confidence in my abilities, because you work through that part of the I'm an admissions error, or I'm not as good as the rest of the faculty part of your thinking, because you're surrounded by such amazing people and it's Harvard or Harvard. He said he learned that he had some strengths. Other people had strengths too, but that he also contributed. And then he also said he really enjoyed being part of something of consequence. Everybody here at the Harvard Kennedy School is here because of wanting to make the world a freer, safer, healthier, more just place. And it's really about public service. And so being part of that is something that buoys you to work through whatever that is. And quite frankly, I think I'm here because it's Harvard, and Harvard stands for something. And so that prestige can maybe help us have greater influence in service and in advancing, the mission.
I believe as you in the importance of curiosity. So what would you say to people that would encourage them to lean into curiosity? Because we're living in a world right now where people seem so focused on their things and the fear that they have about somebody doing something to them. What would you say to people to encourage them around the importance of leaning into curiosity around others?
It's a great question, and I'm asking so many of our graduating students this time of the year, as you look back on your transformative year here at the Kennedy School, what is the one quality that you've developed that you want to keep in terms of your effective implementation going forward? And most every student says something around listening more, about asking better questions that don't put people in a box, but that explore, leaning into the your story and my story, of populating that third story so that it's a both and, about wonderment and curiosity. Even if it's in, I'm feeling angry or triggered, I wonder what it is that they've said that I'm experiencing it that way. And that's a reflective engagement that out of the Harvard Negotiations Project is here, to have those conflicting or dangerous conversations, or courageous conversations, or difficult conversations, vital, whatever we put to that. Leaning into that curiosity, wonderment is really the way that we move forward. Oftentimes we react, and that it gets as a win-loss, or who's got the truth, and it gets at who's to blame, and it doesn't get at contribution, perception, all of those, what feelings are even present, what identities are being triggered. Curiosity is so critically important.
I want to ask you, Tommy, I'll let you jump right back in here, a related question, which may be too big for the time that we have left. But I think I mentioned to you at the beginning when we were getting started that we're living in a world right now where it seems like the negative gets a lot more airtime. And the media uses the negative, politicians use the negative in order to get people's attention. And so there's a war going on between the negative and the positive. How do we move from just being a hollow optimist, sort of feeling that the future is always going to be better? What can we do to actually get us realistically to embrace things that would lead us more to an optimistic sort of joint future where positivity has more value? Because right now we're not seeing it. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'd like to link kind of optimism with also, I think, our responsibility to be purveyors of hope. And, you know, the father of positive psychology, who we all know well, Marty Seligman, you know, he points out that half of us are born to be pessimists. Half of us have the DNA that are the cup is half empty, and we need, you know, that's a perspective that's, you know, part of who we are. And half of us are, you know, cup half full, and I clearly am. I think you probably are too.
Absolutely.
You know, my blood type, I tell folks, is B positive, and so is my attitude. But you know, Marty Seligman wrote a book in addition to the one that's a top 10 bestseller now, Flourishing. He wrote a book called Learned Optimism because it's so much better for us as a person and for our leadership. And so he shows that you can be a curmudgeon and a cup half empty and a negative person. And there's a way to have learned optimism, which is important as well for our well-being and for developing others. But it's different, I think, than being a purveyor of hope. And hope is incredibly important, I think, for us to be able to sustain the tough parts of what we have to do, and to invest in ourselves to be better, and to invest in developing others, and to elevate performance. And, you know, hope is not a plan, but hope is incredibly important.
Right.
You know, once again, this conversation is so impactful for me and resonates in so many different ways. I'm excited to revisit the conversation. We have a community who has chimed in and who listens silently and actively. And so I want to say thank you on their behalf and my behalf of the time and wisdom that you shared. One thing that I am going to do as a takeaway, as I mentioned before, we work with a lot of school districts, be it public, private schools, secondary, post-secondary, etc. And what I have been learning is that particularly in the secondary school systems, maybe in primary, K through 12, these are educators who have joined, who have been a part of the industry to educate, but for whatever reason, diversity, equity, and inclusion is triggering them in a way that is maladaptive and unproductive, maybe even negative, and moves more toward that skepticism and pessimism. It is juxtaposed with them being an educator, particularly for the next generation. So that piece of hope, as you just talked about, I haven't heard that from the educators who are saying, I don't know why we are doing this, whatever that DE&I work is, at the same time, trying to teach the kiddos to go to the next level. But I haven't heard that the transformation or the transition of hope to the next generation. And I think this is, I'm just kind of thinking out loud, and thank you for allowing me to do that, that part of education, I believe, is transitioning or transferring hope and optimism that we can solve some of these problems. We can be a part of the solution. Any thoughts about that?
Yes. And, you know, while I was listening to you, and first of all, just I salute everyone invested in our K through 12 and even before that, but developing our future. It's so important. And so you also talk about, maybe not understanding the why. And Simon Sinek has that book, Start with Why. I think we actually have to embrace the why to help us on that journey. And so that's critically important. And finding a way to think about that why is actually sometimes that's our purpose. That's what sustains us in this hard work. There's actually a study done on women. It's through the Harvard Business Review. This was published on unseen barriers for CEOs. And the women CEOs, and it's maybe 12 to 15%, right, that get through that glass ceiling, they had a better clarity of their purpose in life. And I think that's been replicated in many different studies, that when we have that clarity, we're more likely to persist, to be relentless, to be persistent, and to be healthier in the journey and successful. But there's also a quote, and I want to give this quote. It's Cassie Underwood said this, because I think it's also, as educators and as people that do what we do, and this example, I think that one of our roles is to help each individual figure out their why. And young kids actually are clearer about their why sometimes than we are, because the world puts us in a box that we forget it, we bury it. But she says this, she says, what I discovered is when we are authentic, original, there are no sides, there's no divide. Others' needs become our own. There's real love, which I might argue is the reason we are all here. And so the term authenticity, which actually means original, is in each and every one of us. And Brene Brown has a fabulous book. Of all of her books, one of my favorites about diversity, equity, and inclusion is The Braving the Wilderness.
Yes.
Yeah. And I always thought about, especially in the military, they're making us all the same, right? And the forest is really just having us all wearing the same uniform and being the same and having the same statements. And actually, she writes about that the strength of that forest is in the roots of each individual tree. And that's who we are, the journey we've been on, our values, our motivations, our distinctiveness, that we are strengthening each other in that authenticity, in that originality that makes the forest grow up so beautifully. And that's why I was looking at your logo, make it plain and that beautiful tree. To me, it means all of that in the work that you're doing, Tommy, and Eric as well. And I see also our listeners, a dad who's just really proud of his daughter for going up through getting her advanced degree in mechanical engineering, which is a very difficult path and a very needed one to have women in STEM. And so, good on male allies too for supporting and encouraging.
And I would say that Steve Brokamp, that the whole Brokamp family is a family of educators.
Wow.
His father was one of my great friends and mentors, and he was like a father figure to me. I loved Ray Brokamp. He was a former retired superintendent of the Cincinnati Public Schools, but also then sort of led the Leadership Cincinnati program for decades, and had me working with him for decades as well. So they're a powerful family. I wanted to ask you also, as we come closer to the end, around what are some things that you would recommend to men in order to be powerful allies and supporters of women in their pursuit of leadership? Because you talked about some men in your own career experience that have been allies and supporters. Oftentimes I'm ashamed of some of the things that men do when they're married to women who exceed them in terms of their career levels of success. What are some things that you can offer that are helpful for men to consider as they try to be strong allies to women?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I so value male allies as a incredibly important part of any woman's success or initiatives or efforts. I personally have had mostly male mentors, some of the examples I gave earlier, because there just weren't that many women who were senior in the military as I was coming up through the ranks. And I also have been part of many women's groups, particularly one here working for Mayor Walsh when he was in Boston on equity issues, pay equity. And what we learned through that and really recruiting companies and organizations to provide their data so that we could study pay equity in the Boston area, not just for gender issues. We started to learn a lot about pay equity issues in different industries and in other types of minority. But what we found was that in order to move the needle on pay equity work, we needed male allies that embraced pay equity. And so we started to make that a priority in our work. And so there is a book written by a couple of colleagues of mine that is called Athena Rising. That is a great documentation of women sharing stories of male allies and the things that worked and the things that didn't. And I've shared in that book several of my own stories, and these two authors go out on the road, and it's a great read. I think there's a second edition that's coming out soon, but Athena Rising is a fabulous documentation of do's and don'ts for male allies.
You know, as I continue to listen to you, Dr. Bourne, it is obvious to me that you are learned, experienced, and you have rope memory. You can literally pull the data, the references, the quotes, your own experiences, and you articulate it in my view, and I absolutely get what Eric was saying about you in a very palatable way. It's very palatable. Because at the beginning of our talk, when Eric was sharing your bio, personally, I felt a little small. I thought I had achieved some things in my life, and then I heard your bio. I haven't done a damn thing. So with that being said, I have taken some notes. I look to revisit the conversation. I look to reference the books that you have shared, to read them, because I believe that education, there are different paradigms that I've learned about education, and one of which is that education is the intergenerational transmission of culture, and that what I'm hearing from you, I'm learning from you as if you are my professor, right? And I'm leaning into my next opportunity. And my next opportunity is when I'm in front of my clients, be it one person or be it 10,000, that I can share with them a nugget that will catapult them, and they can put this in their jetpack and off they go. That's my measure of success. It's not my own trajectory. It's how many people can I help get started to go on their way. And you have given me kind of a menu of options to provide to people, you know, based on their palate, right? And here's a menu to feast on this opportunity. I would like to say thank you. This morning's been great.
Thank you, Tom.
And I'll offer this, that I just appreciate the way that you don't just say things, but you walk them out and you live in a way that aligns with your values. We spoke at this event a couple of months ago, and I may have shared it with Tommy that when I arrived at the event, I didn't see anybody else in the room that looked like me. Yeah. And so sometimes as a professional, when you get a little older, you don't just feel like networking with strangers. So I just went to a table and set myself down like, I don't see anybody that looks like me. I'm just going to sit down. I'll talk tomorrow. And you came and found me, and the whole room changed. It transformed by the smile and the positive energy that you brought to my table. And it lifted my spirits. I can say that you've done that this morning on the show. There are a lot of people in our community, from my wife, who has said some wonderful things, to educators like Steve Brokamp, to people like Terry Cooley, who I went to school with. Terry's one of 22 siblings, all from the same parents. Terry Cooley is a foster dad of, I think, 4 or 5 children in Los Angeles, California. And he said there are things that you've said that he's going to share with his boys. And so I just really thank you for your contributions today. You'll have the final word. Is there anything that you want to leave us with? And if people were to try to reach out to contact you or read some of your references or try to get you to come speak at their organization, how might they do that?
Right. Well, the last question is easy. All our information is out there on the Harvard Kennedy School faculty website. Just look up Dana Bourne and you can find my email and a contact there. And for a closing word, I actually, other success is our success, and I'm with you in trying to create that wave of elevating others. We learn so much from all levels, and I guess I want to finish with Amanda Gorman and one of her words. The poet laureate that started here as an undergraduate at Harvard, and then somehow rises up to speak at the Biden's presidential inauguration. It's just amazing. But these are some words from her that I think I'd love to leave as a final word. And this was from someone so young, but so wise. This hope is our door, our portal. Even if we never get back to normal, someday we can venture beyond it to leave the known and take the first steps. So let us not return to what is normal or what was normal, but reach towards what is next. And out of the mouths of babes, there's such wisdom. And so thank you for doing this podcast. Thank you for focusing on what's really tough, but very important, and for the fruitful fun that we just enjoyed. Thank you.
Awesome.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your leadership and happy Mother's Day.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
It's the best job there is.
Yes.
Right. And for our community, we want to thank you for joining us again this week. And we'll look forward to you joining us again next week. We're going to have Calvin Williams. He's a real guru and subject matter expert around fatherhood. And so we'll take up that conversation next week. Take care.
Fantastic.
Enjoy each other.
Bye-bye.